The court buzzed with anticipation. For the first time in Wake County's long legal history, a sitting judge was on trial. Not just any judge, but Judge Ronald Vance, the man whose rulings shaped careers, changed destinies, and instilled fear in attorneys and criminals alike. Yet, today he wasn't seated high on the bench. He sat below it, shoulders taut, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the floor, a defendant. Across the room stood Pam Bondi, seasoned prosecutor, with a sharp tongue and a sharper sense of justice. She adjusted her blazer, not for style, but readiness. Her presence had always commanded attention, but today, she was a storm. The courtroom quieted as the bailiff called order. Pam stepped forward. Her heels echoed with authority across the marble floor. "You thought the robe would shield you forever, didn't you?" A collective gasp rippled across the gallery. Reporters scribbled feverishly. Jurors leaned forward. Even the court stenographer paused before remembering to type. Judge Vance didn't look up. "For years," Pam continued, pacing slowly, "you sat in that chair, ruling over lives like a god among mortals. But what happens when the god becomes the criminal?" The defense attorney objected, "Your Honor, this is grandstanding." But the presiding judge, Justice Camille Monroe, waved it off. "Overruled. Let her speak." Pam nodded respectfully and returned her eyes to Vance. "I've brought facts. But more than that, I've brought voices you silenced." She held up a file, thick, weathered, and scarred like the lives it represented. Let's begin with Elena Hart, 25, small business owner, lost everything in a case you dismissed without review. Her evidence? Unheard. Her future? Destroyed. A tremble flickered at the corner of Vance's mouth. Pam approached the jury box. But what no one knew, until now, was that the defendant in that case, James Callister, wasn't just any man. He was your silent partner. His offshore company sent a deposit to an account, with a trail that ends at your front porch. She turned to the gallery. Some may ask, why now? Why speak out after so many years? Her voice lowered. Because truth doesn't expire. And justice delayed is still justice if someone dares to chase it. Vance's fingers twitched on the desk. Still silent. But Pam saw it, the first crack. She held up a second document. This is the denial order. No explanation. No legal merit. Just a signature. She dropped it on the table with a soft thud. The sound echoed louder than a gavel. People trusted you. I trusted you, she added, voice faltering just slightly. You taught at my law school. You mentored new judges. You looked us in the eye and told us the law would never bend. Then she leaned in, quietly enough that only Vance could hear. You bent it, twisted it, broke it. And louder now. But today, Judge Vance, the law is bending back. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. For the first time, the man in the robe looked small. Pam turned toward the bench. Your Honor, I am prepared to submit into evidence a list of suspicious rulings, verified financial transactions, and testimonies. But let me say this before we dive into documents and law. This case isn't about bringing down a man. It's about lifting up the truth. The room stirred. Injustice isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers behind oak-paneled doors. But someone always hears it. And I did. And I'm here to make sure everyone else does too. The second day of trial. The energy in the Wake County Justice Center is electric. News vans surround the courthouse, headlines flood the internet, and whispers of the trial of the century ripple through the legal world. Pam Bondi stood by the evidence table, her hands steady, her mind razor-sharp. The courtroom was packed, some faces eager, some nervous, others skeptical. But all eyes were on her. Even Judge Ronald Vance, once North Carolina's most feared gavel, couldn't avoid her gaze today. Justice Camille Monroe gave a quiet nod from the bench. Proceed, counselor. Pam stepped forward and lifted a thick brown envelope from the table. I now submit into evidence Exhibit B, a trail of financial transactions, certified and time-stamped, from a network of shell corporations tied to entities the defendant claimed no association with. She turned to the jury. But numbers don't lie. And neither do timestamps. The bailiff handed the packet to the clerk, and it was logged with mechanical precision. Pam continued. Let me walk you through just one of these transactions. She tapped on the large TV screen now displaying a flowchart. At the top, a company name, Trident Holdings Ltd. Below it, an arrow pointing to an offshore bank account. Then another arrow. Then another. Finally, at the bottom, a luxury home purchased in the name of Judge Vance's cousin. Now, you might say, this doesn't directly implicate the defendant, Pam said calmly. But when 5 of the defendant's controversial case dismissals align perfectly with deposits into this web, well, that's either divine coincidence or systemic abuse. The jury leaned in. Pam picked up another folder, slimmer, worn, and marked with handwritten notes. This, she said softly, is a transcript from the closed-door meeting regarding the State versus Brunner case. You remember that one, Judge? Vance's jaw twitched. Pam opened the transcript and read aloud. The judge recommends swift dismissal due to procedural errors. Case lacks merit. She closed the folder. Except it didn't. The prosecution team was ready, ironclad evidence, key witness prepped, and 3 days from trial, it was wiped away. Gone. Poof. She stepped closer to the judge's table, voice low but intense. You buried it. For a price. Judge Vance finally looked up. Not with anger, but fatigue. His once cold, commanding eyes were clouded. Pam didn't stop. Your Honor, I request permission to call our first key witness, Janine Wallace, the clerk who served under Judge Vance for 8 years. Gasps fluttered through the courtroom. Everyone had assumed Janine would stay silent, like she had for years. The double doors opened. In walked Janine Wallace, mid-40s, nervous but resolute. She took the stand, her eyes flickering briefly toward the judge. Pam approached slowly. Ms. Wallace, how many times did you witness Judge Vance override rulings, erase evidence, or deny jury input? Janine took a breath. At least a dozen. That I knew of. Maybe more. The courtroom murmured. Pam raised a hand to silence the crowd. And why didn't you come forward before? Janine looked down. Because I was afraid. He threatened to ruin me. Said no one would believe a paper pusher. But now, she looked up, locking eyes with Pam, I believe in justice more than fear. Pam smiled softly. No further questions. As Janine stepped down, her face reflected something new, relief. Pam turned to the judge, whose hands were now folded tightly, knuckles white. There's still time to speak the truth, she said, her voice suddenly gentle. But every second you wait, justice gets stronger, and your power weaker. The judge exhaled shakily, but said nothing. Justice Monroe called for a recess. Later that evening, Pam sat alone in the conference room. She sifted through pages, tired but unwavering. A photo fell from one of the case files. A picture of Elena Hart, smiling outside her old storefront. Pam picked it up, stared at it. She lost everything, she whispered, because of one man's greed. Then she closed the folder with a sense of renewed fire. The 3rd day of trial. The national spotlight is now blinding. Wake County Justice Center is surrounded by protesters, news cameras, and curious onlookers. Inside, the courtroom is electric with anticipation. The gavel struck. All rise, the bailiff called as Justice Camille Monroe entered and took her seat. Pam Bondi stood ready. She wasn't tired. She wasn't nervous. She was ready for the final push. Across the room, Judge Ronald Vance looked pale. His suit hung a little looser today, like the weight of truth had started to pull on him. The once commanding man was fraying at the edges. Justice Monroe leaned forward. Ms. Bondi, you may continue. Pam nodded, stepping forward with the same calm fire that had gripped the courtroom for 2 days. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we've heard about manipulated rulings, shell companies, and bribery. But let's shift our focus. She held up a single photograph. This is Elias Ford, a public defender who passed away last year. He once said, "Corruption hides in quiet corners. If you want to find it, follow the silence." She paused. I followed the silence. Pam turned and activated the projector again. The screen displayed a timeline, a clean, chronological sequence of every controversial ruling made by Judge Vance in the last 5 years. Notice anything? The jury examined the dates. Each major ruling, Pam said, was followed by a suspicious deposit or an acquisition by a Vance-adjacent entity within 72 hours. She tapped the screen. This is no coincidence. It's a system. The judge's face twitched. Still think this is just circumstantial, Judge Vance? Silence. Pam turned and walked toward the evidence table. I now submit Exhibit F, a series of internal memos and handwritten notes recovered from the courthouse's archive by a whistleblower who chose to remain anonymous. Gasps echoed. These notes contain judge-to-judge communications, recommendations, reversals, even threats. All in handwriting confirmed to be Judge Vance's. All designed to push personal agendas and punish noncompliance. The defense lawyer rose abruptly. Objection. These notes were not previously submitted. Justice Monroe flipped through the pages and raised an eyebrow. They're authenticated. Overruled. Pam continued. Your Honor, I'd like to call a surprise witness to the stand. The courtroom buzzed. Even the judge sat up straighter. The door opened. In walked Detective James Holloway, a veteran financial crimes investigator from Raleigh PD. The courtroom held its breath. Pam faced him. Detective Holloway, how long have you been investigating the Vance-linked financial network? For years, he said bluntly. Silently until now. And what have you found? Multiple deposits into off-grid accounts. At least 3 routed through South American shell banks. All tied to a proxy company with a direct connection to Vance's personal legal trust. He looked straight at the judge. Which he thought was untraceable. Pam leaned in. Do you believe, under oath, that these transactions are evidence of criminal behavior? Yes. Bribery, obstruction, fraud. The judge flinched. Pam turned to him. Do you have anything to say? Vance gripped the desk again, but his hands were shaking. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. Pam took a deep breath. Then let me say it for you. She turned back to the jury. This man built a kingdom of silence. But the walls are crashing down. And now, we're not just left with corruption, we're left with consequences. Vance suddenly stood. I will not be silenced. Everyone turned. I built this court. I made this town safe. You think you know everything, Pam Bondi? You think because you have a few files and scared clerks that you can burn down everything I created? Justice Monroe raised a hand. Order. No. Vance shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. You want a confession? Yes, I protected certain people. Yes, I made choices. Because the system is broken. Because sometimes justice needs to be bent. Pam didn't blink. And who gave you the right to decide that? His breathing was shallow now. His tie hung loose, his forehead glistened. You think you're the hero? He hissed. You think exposing me changes anything? Pam stepped forward slowly. I'm not here to change everything. Just this. Just you. Silence. You ruled by fear. But fear only works when people still believe in your power. The final day of trial. The Wake County Justice Center is under heavy media coverage. Inside, there's a feeling of finality, like history is about to be made. The courtroom was quieter than usual. The usual buzz of anticipation had been replaced by a tense stillness. It wasn't fear. It was respect for what was about to happen. Pam Bondi stood at the center, facing the jury, hands folded, a thick stack of closing arguments resting before her. She didn't read from them. She looked them in the eyes. You've heard a lot, she began. Numbers, testimonies, timelines. Some of it painful. Some of it unbelievable. But that's what corruption looks like. It hides in places that shouldn't need light, like this courtroom. She slowly turned toward Judge Ronald Vance, now hollow-eyed, his once pristine demeanor reduced to a pale echo of the man he was on day one. For decades, this man made you believe he was justice. But justice isn't power. Justice is truth. And truth has finally spoken. She paced slowly, letting her voice fill the room like a preacher in a church. This case was never about vengeance. It's about accountability. It's about the woman who lost her life savings and never got a hearing. The clerk who lived in fear. The defenders who watched the law bend until it broke. Pam walked toward the jury box. You have the power now. You decide if the robe protects or blinds. A long silence. She closed her file and stepped back. I rest my case. Justice Camille Monroe turned to the jury. You've heard the arguments. You've seen the evidence. Now your duty is to decide whether this courtroom still belongs to the people or to corruption. The jury left the room. For 45 agonizing minutes, the room held its breath. Judge Vance sat motionless. Pam sat still. She didn't flip through papers. She didn't pace. She waited, steady and quiet, her strength now in stillness. The door creaked open. The jury returned. A pin-drop silence followed as the jury foreperson stood, paper trembling in his hand. In the case of the People versus Judge Ronald Vance, we the jury find the defendant. The pause. Guilty. On all counts. A thunderclap of noise erupted behind them, gasps, sobs, applause held back for days. Vance closed his eyes, exhaling like a man who had finally hit rock bottom. Justice Monroe nodded solemnly. Judge Ronald Vance, you are hereby stripped of your judicial office, remanded into custody, and will be sentenced under federal corruption statutes. She turned to the bailiff. Take him. The bailiff approached. For the first time in decades, the judge stood, not to command, but to surrender. Pam watched as the handcuffs clicked shut, the final symbol of justice taking back its power. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Some held signs. Others just stood, watching, stunned. Pam walked out the front steps alone, folders in hand, her silhouette framed by the North Carolina sun. A reporter ran up. Ms. Bondi, do you have a statement? She paused. Then simply said, one corrupt judge down. Many more to go.